Good evening, everybody. I'm Karrie Patterson. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks, Stephen, for giving me an opportunity to do service work. It's not only good for the group and for AA, but it's also good for me. It's really important for me that I remember this story. You might think that's kind of funny, but I remember my sponsor gave me a card on my 15th sobriety birthday, and I thought it was so weird. The card said, "May you never forget the way you were when you got here." And I thought, that is just the weirdest thing, because I didn't think I wanted to remember that way. The way I was not very fun. And I'm just really grateful that I was in a new place. So when she wrote that, I thought, well, that's weird. And then talking to her about it, I came to understand that it's really important that I not forget that. It's really important that I remember that I need to be here and need to be working this program. A friend of mine says every morning when I wake up, I wake up with untreated alcoholism, and that's the absolute truth with me. Talking to Stephen this morning, I did admit I was a little bit nervous because I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the ones who zoomed right up to that line, the line where we cross it and we say, how did that happen that I didn't realize I was an alcoholic? When did it start to go bad? Well, I'm one of the ones that zoomed right up to that line and had a moment of clarity. So I didn't wreck my life. But on the other side of that coin, I do often question myself and say, gosh, was I enough of an alcoholic to qualify? And then I realized that's just my ego talking. That's just my ego talking, trying to get me to think that there's nothing wrong with me. I'm honored to be one of your membership. I'm honored to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing, as Stephen likes to say. And so I'm grateful to be here. It's by the grace of God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that I haven't had a drink since the 17th of March, 2005. And I quit on St. Patty's Day. Actually, that was my first sober day. And I'm forever grateful for that day. My story is a little bit interesting. Oh, isn't that wonderful? My story is interesting. Tune in now. But my story is a little bit interesting because I'm going to tell you what it was like. But then I have two what happens. It's what is like, what it happened, and then what happened, and what it's like now. But the summary of my story is that I really, really came to understand the difference between sobriety and serenity. I love the name Serenity Improvement Group because it always reminds me of my story. So I have very clear memories of the first time I ever drank. We were kids playing in my grandparents' basement, me and my cousins, and my aunts and uncles and my grandma and grandpa. In those days, they had a little bar in their basement. And we were all playing and watching mom and them over by the bar talking and laughing. And I remember I was just really thirsty because I'm pretty intense, and I was very intense as a kid. So when I was playing, if I got thirsty, I needed a drink right now. You need to give me a drink right now because I had to go back and play. So I went up to my mom and I said, "Mom, I'm thirsty. Can I have something to drink?" And my grandma just reached down and she had a drink in her hand. She said, "Here, have a sip of this, sweetie." And I did, and holy buckets, was it good. I mean, to tell you, I thought that was the best thing ever. And it turns out it was a 7-7. And so I took another drink of it, and my grandma said, "Now that's enough. Go back and play." Okay, so I go back and I play. And it probably wasn't 10 minutes later when I went back to her and asked her for another drink. And she gave me another drink and sent me back to play. And short while after that, I had to have another one. I just had to have another one. She told me no. She said, "Now you've had enough. You need to go back and play." And I remember thinking very clearly, this is just so strange. I was 4 years old. I remember thinking very clearly, I wonder how long I have to wait here before grandma loses track of how much time it's been since she gave me a last drink and I can go back and get another one. 4 years old, and I'm already learning how to manipulate my grandmother and get another drink. All I knew from that experience was that I really, really, really liked 7-7s, and that if I really wanted to be happy, I had to have enough that would satisfy me before somebody took it away, because it just made me mad to not have more. It was like giving one small piece of chocolate to a dog. It's just cruel. You just don't do it. So I grew up in a really, really good family, really good home. My mom and dad were really great parents. No traumas, no tragedies. I have no excuse for anything traumatic in my life. But I did start to have problems with alcohol when I was in high school. I was at a high school basketball game, and I had snuck a few beers inside the basketball game, inside my shirt. And we were in the girls' bathroom at halftime, and I was in there, and I was drinking in the girls' bathroom one of these 2 beers. Thank God a parent from the other school saw me and reported me to the authorities there. And Mr. Bennett was at my house by the time I got home, and he was there talking to my dad, and they were going to expel me from school for a couple days. I didn't think anything of it. I thought I really needed a break, and I really did. There were some challenging times going on at that point with my folks. Then later on, when I was in college, it just turned out that I thought, well, I must be stupid because I couldn't pass my classes. Well, I couldn't pass my classes, not because I was stupid. It was just because I was drinking like a fish. Then I joined the Air Force, and every time we flew into Southwest Asia, we'd stop in Germany. And every time we stopped in Germany for 17 hours for the crew to rest so we could continue our flight, the rest of us would go out and go drinking. And I was always the one who was so drunk that they had to carry me back onto the plane. Later on, when I went back to college, and I was what's called a simultaneous membership program cadet. I was an Army ROTC cadet. I got into trouble with drinking in my unit there, near the university where I went to school. And it's funny, I didn't think about all of these things until I was talking to Stephen this morning. The impact that alcohol has had on my life, the negative impacts, because really all my brain, my selective memory brain, wants me to remember is all the good times. It doesn't want me to remember all the oh no's, you shouldn't have done that. Well, fast forward into my life, and I had finally graduated from college and taken a commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Army. And I traveled all around the world, as you probably imagine. And I was in Macedonia for operations in Kosovo. And I still, bear in mind, none of this I'm registering until far after I've gotten in this program and started working it. But I was in Macedonia, and I got really, really drunk with a Marine, a sailor. I'm sorry, 2 Marines and a sailor. And so it was bad right from the start. And I got into a cab, and I almost got myself into a situation that I couldn't get out of. Thankfully, the cab driver was driving really, really fast because he saw what was about to happen to me in the back of that cab. I still didn't get it. I still didn't get that alcohol was a bad thing. I just really enjoyed my drinking. Then a couple years later, I was at the schoolhouse at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And I never this is the thing about me. I never put 2 and 2 together. I never said to myself, drinking makes me feel better. I always said, I feel great when I'm drinking, but I never said to myself, drinking makes me feel better. And I'm kind of grateful that I didn't put that 2 and 2 together. But while I was at the schoolhouse, I was not happy. I was in with a small group of people that we just didn't all get along, and they kind of teased me a little bit, and I roughhoused back with them. Anyway, by the end of the day, I was ready for my 12-pack of beer, even though I didn't really want it. The mornings really sucked because, you know, in the Army, we got to get up at like 5 o'clock in the mornings because we're always out running at 6 o'clock, and getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning while you're hungover is just no fun. So I remember halfway through that school year, talking to my partner and saying, you know, do you think I have a drinking problem? Because I really don't want to drink, but by the time I get to the end of the day, I need a drink. I can't help it. And she said, no, you know, I don't think you're a teetotaler. I just think you're probably hitting the sauce too hard. And I said, okay, yeah, you're right. Because, you know, I don't want to think that I've got a problem. But then a couple years later, I had gotten into a little bit of trouble again because of my drinking. And I was lucky enough to be selected to go on a deployment to Kuwait. And while I was there, a friend of mine, I ran into her. It's just funny how you run into people on other sides of the planet and you know them. And we got to hanging out, and after a couple days, she told me that she was having a really hard time because she had been drinking an awful lot, and she didn't know what to do. Well, I didn't know what to do either, because, you know, heck, I don't realize I've got a problem with alcohol. But my mom was a recovered alcoholic. I've got lots of alcoholics on both sides of my family. So I remember calling my mom from Kuwait and saying, hey, Mom, what do I do? I've got this friend who needs to talk and she needs some help, but I don't know what to do because she's an alcoholic. And Mom said, probably the best advice my mom ever gave me. My mom said, just listen to her. I can do that. And so I did. I listened to her story for weeks. I listened to her talk. I listened to her struggles. I listened to her fears. I was just in awe of the story because so much of it was kind of familiar, but it didn't really ring any bells. I mean, I recognized parts of it, but I didn't really ring any bells. Then in March of 2019, I went back to the United States on 2 weeks of leave. And when I got home, my home life wasn't what I expected it to be. I'm not going to go into details because you just don't need them. But the reality of it was that I was disappointed that my precious leave time was going to be ruined. And so I decided to get really drunk. And I did. I spent the next, let's see, I had 14 days of leave. So I spent probably the next 8 or 9 days just in a complete state of oblivion the whole time. And I remember waking up on St. Patty's Day, and I had these blue and white polka dotted boxer shorts on, the things that you wear when you wake up drunk from a hangover. I had blue and white spotted boxer shorts on, and I looked on the table there, and I had drank a full fifth of Johnny Walker Blue Label whiskey the night before, and I was sick and I was shaking, and it was just it was one of the worst feelings I've ever had in my life. And it was the first time in my life that I ever said, I need another drink first thing in the morning. And just to go back just a little bit, the year prior to that, my uncle, who was the family alcoholic, died from his disease. And so I had that little nugget of information in my mind that morning when I was standing there sick and shaking in my blue polka dot boxer shorts. I also remembered that there was a bottle of Seagram 7 in the little cupboard. You know, the little cupboards that are right above your refrigerator, those places where you put things and they just stay up there like forever and you don't realize you got stuff up in there until you move again. Well, I had an old bottle of Seagram 7 up there because I loved those 7.7s, but I hated whiskey straight. I couldn't drink it like that. I couldn't drink Seagram's 7 like that. So I knew I needed a drink, and I was standing there in the edge of my kitchen looking up at that cupboard thinking that I needed that drink. And then suddenly it became all clear to me. It was as if that cupboard became a hyperclear mirror, and I could see myself on the path to alcoholism. I could see myself on the path to becoming the woman that my uncle eventually, the alcoholic that my uncle eventually became, and he died. I saw myself getting DUIs. I saw myself wrapping my car around a tree. I saw myself getting fired from my job because of alcoholism. I saw myself in all these terrible, horrible situations because I couldn't stop drinking. And I just knew that if I opened up that cupboard and took down that bottle of Seagram 7, that I was deliberately going to be putting one foot on that path. And it scared the hell out of me. I like to think of that moment in my life as a moment of clarity. And when I realized what I was looking at, then I remembered all the stories that my friend had told me while we were in Kuwait together about her drinking. And I started to think about my drinking. And I just said, I remember saying this out loud. I remember thinking, well, this looks familiar. And it sure did. So I didn't drink that alcohol, and I got on a plane a couple days later, and I flew back to Kuwait. And the guy that was sitting next to me in my cubicle in Kuwait was a man named Sterling S. And he had been helping me with my friend. Sterling was an alcoholic in the program, and he was helping guys in the little office area where we were work the steps. So I get back to Kuwait and I sat down next to him, and I literally got off the plane and went and sat down right next to him. I said, Sterling, I think I'm an alcoholic. And he looked at me and said, no shit. I guess he knew one when he saw one. So Sterling gave me this book, this very book. I've packed it around the world many, many times. And we had a little meeting there at Camp Arif John called the Dry Camels. And I went to that meeting. I was the only female there most of the time. There was one meeting where there was another female there, but it was good and I really enjoyed it. But I didn't have somebody walk up to me and put their arm around me and say, okay, kid, here's what you do. You get yourself a sponsor, you get yourself a home group, you get yourself all these things that you need to begin working a program. Nobody said that. And so I just didn't really have a program. I just went to meetings whenever I was in a place where there were meetings, and I didn't read the whole big book. I certainly didn't work the steps. I didn't have a home group, and I didn't have a sponsor. But I was sober. And that's when I learned from Sterling the difference between sobriety and serenity, from being sober in recovery and being dry. And so for the next 13 years, I was on a dry drunk. It was to say that I was not a very nice person is an understatement. I was in a demanding line of work to begin with. My leadership style, I always thought it was better to lead with honey than it was with vinegar. But I tell you, if somebody didn't do exactly, precisely, specifically what I wanted him to do, boy, they really got an earload from me. And it's embarrassing to think back now. You know, when I was working my steps and I was doing my amends, I mean, there's hundreds of people out there in the world that I owe an amends to, and I just don't know how, because I'll never see them again. People around the planet. To say I was prickly was an understatement, but I never did drink. And I remember thinking a lot that I just would love to drink, But my mom, bless her heart, every time I had a sobriety anniversary, she would send me one of her coins. And so every year I'd get more of these coins, and I'd have the stash, and I just would tell myself that I can't drink because I'd have to give my coins back to my mom, and I couldn't face that. So those coins really helped me a lot. Then I remember being in Afghanistan, and it was a really challenging deployment. I was in a position where things needed to get done, and they needed to be done in an efficient manner so we could leave Afghanistan, but at the same time, keep everybody as safe as possible while we're doing it. It's a very delicate balancing act when you're trying to do that. You don't want to give away too much of your stuff, or you might get attacked and be run over. So you want to get rid of just enough of your stuff to make it safe. And I was just really upset one time, and I called my mom, and I was talking to her about the challenges of my job, and I was just crying, and I was just a mess. And my mom said, "Oh, Karrie, why can't you just let go and let God?" And I just sat there and I said, "What the hell does that even mean, Mom? How do I do that? What does that even mean?" And she couldn't really explain it to me in words that I could understand. But I took those words to heart, and I went to every friend that I had there on that FOB in Afghanistan. And I asked them, I asked people in my little social group that I knew were a little bit religious, because I'm not religious. And I asked them, I said, "What does it mean to let go and let God?" They couldn't tell me. I even went to the brigade chaplain, who was just an outstanding woman. Gosh, she was so cool. And I went to her and I asked her, "What does it mean to let go and let God?" And she couldn't tell me either. And so I never found out. I never knew. It was just so painful. I never knew how to let go. I just never knew how to do it. And I'm grateful that I figured it out years later. But for that point in time in my sobriety, I was just miserable because the world was pushing down on me. I had all of these responsibilities, and I felt like if I failed, if I, capital letters with squiggly writing and little quotation marks around it, I failed in my mission, somebody could die. Well, no, Karrie, you're not responsible for the livelihoods of everybody on the planet. You're just not that important. But my little ego thought I was. I just spent the next 5 years of my career just in misery, trying to keep up with the fight, trying to do everything that needed to be done, trying my best to be the one that they needed me to be. And I thought that as soon as I retired, things would get a lot better. And I did retire. I retired gratefully, although it made me so mad that I retired on February 29th of 2016, because I had to do an extra day of service because it was a leap year when I retired. So I was kind of ripped about that. But I retired in February 2019, and wouldn't you know it, it didn't get any better. It wasn't necessarily that I was under a lot less stress, which I was. I was under a phenomenally less amount of stress. My partner and I bought 80 acres in the middle of nowhere in Kansas. I live south and west of Topeka, out in the country. And we put our house almost in the middle of those 80 acres where, I can suntan naked if I want to, and nobody will, but the squirrels will know I'm out there. It's perfect. I was in the best stress-free environment, but I still would have these outbursts of anger. I still would have these points of shame in my life where I just felt like I wasn't good enough, And there's a wonderful young family here well, they were young at the time. I'm grateful to say that they're all grown up now. But one of the little families here, they had a mother and a son, and she was a little bit challenged financially, and her son was absolutely brilliant. I knew it from the first time I met him when he was just a little kid, couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. And the education out here is not really the most awesome, so we always kind of gave him a hand. And when it came time for him to be in his junior year of high school and he was taking the SAT tests and whatnot, we were making it financially available for them to take the SAT test, because if you want to take it more than once, it costs you a certain amount of money. Well, he didn't score as high on his SAT as I thought he should on one of the many times that he took it. And I got mad at him, and I said something to him, and I scared him. And I feel bad about that. But I realized then that something was just not right. If you get mad at a kid who scored so much higher for scoring low, but who scored so much higher than you on your SAT, something's wrong. I mean, I got a 14 on my ACT in math just because I filled in my name as the initial. So it really made me feel bad that I just couldn't stop getting mad all the time. And then what happened, number 2 happens. I took that kid and his mom to the University of Utah, or I'm sorry, Utah State University, to explore the aeronautics engineering division program there. And while we were there, I got a phone call from a friend who told me that one of my good friends here in the local community had slipped off the wagon. Now, my friend and I were 3 months apart in our sobriety. He had 3 more months of sobriety than I did. And I felt terrible that he had a relapse. And I was in Utah with his grandson and his daughter, and there was nothing I could do to help him out. But I sat and I thought about it a lot while we were there in Utah. And as soon as we got back from Utah, I was going to go over to his house and I was going to help him. But here's the rub though, right? Remember, I'm sober for 13 years, but I haven't been to meetings. I don't have a sponsor. I haven't been doing the steps. I haven't done all of these things, these sacred tasks that we do to have a program. And so I don't know what to do. For the first time in my life, I don't know what to do. Now, bear in mind, I was whining a little bit ago about, how hard my life was and how I couldn't do. But let me tell you what, I was super confident in many, many things because I knew several things. I knew that I had the best soldiers in the world. I had the best equipment in the world, and I had the best training in the world. And I was never out of confidence. I always knew when they say God was in your foxhole, God was not in my foxhole. I didn't need him because I had all 3 of those things and I wasn't scared a bit. So fast forward, here I am in little teeny tiny Hardyville, Kansas, and my friend is in danger. And I know that for him to drink is to die. And I don't know what to do. I have absolutely no idea what to do. So I get in my pickup truck and I'm going to drive over to his house and I'm going to talk to him. I have no idea what I'm going to say to him. And I've never prayed in my whole adult life. Never have I ever prayed. But I remember grabbing hold of that steering wheel, and I remember just bowing my head and saying, God, my friend is in trouble and I don't know what to do. Please give me the words. And it felt immediately as if somebody put a warm blanket around me when I was cold. I felt a crack right here in my chest. It was as if a dam had broken, only instead of water flowing out of the dam, I could feel water flowing in. It was as if something had finally gotten in. And I heard this voice in my head. We all hear our voice in our head, but this was not my voice. And I heard the word, I heard the voice say, the words will be there when you need them. Just go. Again, here I am. I raised my head and I said out loud, he does exist. Okay, I'm going. And I put the truck in gear and I went, and I swear to you, I went to my friend's house, and we talked for a couple of hours, and I have absolutely no memory of what I said to him, none whatsoever. But I do remember the end of the meeting, and the end of the meeting, Dan was saying, you know, when you get back from Idaho, because I was headed to Idaho again to help take care of my mom with Alzheimer's. He said, when you get back from Idaho, we're going to go to some meetings together. Because all these years he'd been trying to get me to go to meetings with him. We got a little country meeting out here, and boy, did I miss the boat on not getting to that meeting sooner. But I do remember him saying, we need to go to meetings together. And I said, you're on. And so a couple of days later, I got my big book that I'd been packing around the world with me, but I'd never read. I've spot read it. I've certainly never read any of the pages with the squiggly writing or the Roman numerals. Never did that. That would have been far too easy. I got my book and I said, okay, I'm going to go home to my mom's house, who is a recovering alcoholic and in the program up until the point that her Alzheimer's got her to the point where she couldn't really get out of the house. I said, I'm going to go back to Idaho with my mom, and I'm going to sit out there on that deck with her day after day, and I'm going to read this book from cover to cover. And I did. I was out there for a couple months, and I'll never forget the day I opened it up to this page. And believe it or not, it's the very single last story in the back of the big book. I read this whole entire book. I read pieces and parts of this book and never got the real message for Karrie until I'm sitting on that deck and I read the last story in this big book. And the word says, when I had been in AA only a short while, an old timer told me something that has affected my life ever since. AA does not teach us how to handle our drinking, he said. It teaches us how to handle sobriety. And I remember reading that, and I remember slamming the book shut, and my mom was sitting next to me just kind of staring off into space. Slammed the book shut, son of a, and I hit the book down on the table, and she said, what? And I said, couldn't they have put that right up front? Why couldn't they have put that right up front? I would have gotten it then. For all these years, I told my mom, I said, for all these years, I've been miserable. I hated life. I tried so hard to do the right thing, and it always seemed to fail. And I just never seemed to come out on top. And that was because I was trying to come out on top. I'm not meant to win. And I didn't get that. And so all these years I've been miserable miserable as a sober alcoholic, but I didn't have serenity. And they had to put that in the very last part of the book. And so anyway, I had to calm my mom down because she wasn't getting my frantic explosion there. But that's when I realized that this program had something more for me than just not drinking. I never went to meetings when I got back to Kansas or when I retired and I had time to go to meetings because I thought, I'm not drinking. What do I need meetings for? I had no idea. So I get back to Kansas, and I walked right into that first meeting in that little teeny tiny town of Auburn, Kansas. And I asked everybody in the room, I told them who I was and that I was an alcoholic. And I asked everybody in the room if one of them could sponsor me and help take me through the steps, because I didn't know anything about it, but I just knew I needed it. And got crickets. I was so embarrassed. Nobody said anything. I was so disappointed. And I got a ride there with my friend Dan and his mother, Jean. And now Jean had just been diagnosed with cancer, and she'd been given 4 months to live. So anyway, we were driving back, and I was kind of quiet in the back of the truck because nobody answered me when I said I was asking for somebody to help sponsor me. And I think Jean felt a little bit bad for me. So she said, Karrie, I'll sponsor you. And I remember thinking, oh man, this woman, she's about ready to die. I can't ask that of her. And I started to say, well, Jean, no. She said, no. She said, no, I'll walk you through the first few steps. We've got time for that. And bless her heart, she did. But, and this is something that I'm really grateful for, because I knew she only had so much energy, I took it upon myself to go back into this book. It's a textbook. It's not a read it and have a good time and know the ending of the story and then put it down book. It's a textbook, and I treated it as such. In fact, you probably can see all the markings that I've got here. So I went back through that book, the first 164 pages, with a fine-tooth comb. And I taught myself what it meant to do the first step. All those pages before you get to how it works are so vitally important for me, to understand why I need to take that first step. And nobody said in there how to do my first step, but I just figured that since I like to read and I like to write, that I would write down my first step, and I did. And I took my first step writing to Jean, to her house, and she read it, and she said, that's really good. That's really good, Karrie. Now you go back and you do the same thing for step 2. And I went back and I did the same thing for step 2. I went through that with a fine-tooth comb, not only in this book, but in the 12 and 12. And I studied my 12 and 12 and my big book thoroughly. I had a great time until I got to the 3rd step. That was a challenge for me. You paid me, your tax money paid me to be in charge. And now we've got this step saying, no, really, we don't want you to be in charge. And that was a hard one for me to digest. It really was. And I had to put some real thought into that. But I finally did it. And I learned 2 really great things out of that. The first one is that surrender is not to lose. My version of surrender meant somebody had me on my hands and knees and they threw a bag over my head and they were going to haul me off to a cave and somebody was going to cut my head off. That's what surrender meant to me. When I did step 3, I understood that surrender means to win. I didn't get that before I learned that. And then the other really cool thing that I learned about my step 3 work was when I went to visit my sponsor. And anyway, I had my step 3 writing that I had done, you know, my understanding of step 3, my decision. I had all that work, and I spent an afternoon with Jean, and she was such a beautiful woman. She had a beautiful smile, and she just said, you're doing good, kid. You just keep on doing what you're doing. And I got up, and I remember I turned and I was getting ready to leave her house, and I heard her ruffling around behind her little chair. You know how really old people have a chair and they basically stay in that chair all the time. And I said, Jean, honey, what are you doing? Can I help you? And she said, she was digging through her box back there, and she said, oh, you know, I'm just looking for my first step stuff. And I just thought to myself, why on earth would you be looking for your first step stuff? And she said, well, I just want to redo my first step, and I'm looking for my stuff that I did before. And I had this look on my face, I know, because when she turned around, she took one look at my face, because in my mind, I was thinking, listen, if somebody tells me I've got 4 months to live and I'm 2 months into that 4 months, my ass is on a plane to Vegas and we're going to burn it down. I'm not going to be doing my first step again. And she stood up and she looked at me and she smiled at me in that big, beautiful way that she had. And she said, honey, I want to keep getting better all the way to the end. And that's when I learned that this is not a program that you do and you're done. This is a program you do every day for the rest of your life. And as long as you keep growing, you're going to survive every day until the end. What a wonderful gift that was from her. So I kept learning, I kept growing through the process, and I did my steps, and I was a much better woman for it. I used the steps. Here comes the what it's like now part. I used the steps in my life on a daily basis. If something's bothering me just a little bit, I do 10-step calls with my sponsor all the time. I have people like the beautiful Mary Beavers, who is also on this Zoom tonight, people that I can pick up the phone and do a 10-step call with. But if it's really getting my gut it's in my craw and I can't sleep at night, if I go one night and I can't sleep, I break out pen and paper and I do a 4-step inventory on it. And I can work the steps just like magic, and they never fail to clear up the wreckage that I've got going on in my life. And so at my point in time in my sobriety, here's what I've learned just at this point in time. I got to keep going all the way to the end, but I learned that for me, the basic building block of all of my sobriety, the basic building block of everything is humility. I have to shrink my ego back down to a point where it can understand, where it can accept that I can't do it all, that I'm not meant to do it all. So before I can have acceptance, I have to have humility. I need acceptance. Acceptance is really important, because if I can't accept the fact that I can't do it all, that I'm not meant to do it all, then how can I ever surrender? I need acceptance in order to surrender. And so the tricky thing about serenity is you can't have serenity unless you surrender. So that's the pattern for me. Humility enables me to have acceptance. Acceptance enables me to have surrender. And surrender enables me to have serenity. And that's the greatest lesson that I know now through 18 years in my program. It's been a wonderful, wonderful growth opportunity, and I continue to grow in it. I'm so much happier than I used to be. More importantly, I'm so much more useful than I used to be. And I did a lot. And it's all because I've just kind of learned how not to take myself so darn seriously. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Thanks again for allowing me to share, Stephen, and I will pass.